Welcome to episode 171 of Take Flight Podcast. In this latest episode of our podcast, where we explore the latest innovations in technology and artificial intelligence. In this episode, we'll be discussing one of the most exciting developments in natural language processing, ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a language model that has taken the world by storm. It's been making headlines for its ability to generate human-like responses to natural language input, revolutionizing the way we interact with technology. But what exactly is ChatGPT and how does it work? In this episode, we'll be exploring the history and development of this remarkable technology, as well as the ways in which it is being used today. So join us as we delve into the world of ChatGPT and discover the incredible possibilities that this technology holds for the future of artificial intelligence.
Take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for that lovely intro, ChatGPT. I did not write that. I used ChatGPT to do the intro of this episode. So just from the outset, you can see how powerful this tool is. But before we get into this episode, let's just do a round robin and see how everyone is doing. Olu, we'll start with you because your background looks somewhat different. We are recording this episode in the day, but it looks like it's night where you are. So how are you doing?
I'm good, can't complain. I think the listeners or the loyal listeners would know that I have or had a trip planned to Bali. So at this precise moment, I'm actually in Bali, recording with these guys instead of meditation and yoga and other stuff that I could be doing right now. Um, but no, I'm good. I can't complain. I've been here now for a week, peaceful. You could probably tell by the smile on my face that I'm just happy.
You look it. You look it.
I'm not even sure why we're doing this episode about technology. We should be talking about inner peace and finding us. Nah, joking, I'm playing.
It doesn't sound like you're coming back.
We'll see. But how's the rest of you guys been? P?
Yeah, P, how's things on your side?
Yeah, all good on my side. I'm well, family's well. Looking forward to our holiday next week. It's been a couple years since we've taken a vacation. So it's we're very much looking forward to that experience as a family. And obviously I can share more details on the next episode that we record, because then I would have probably been back by then.
You coming to Bali?
We had a conversation about Bali actually. So not this rotation, but it's something on the table for sure.
Oh, y'all should have come through.
Well, you need to start sharing more content, Olu, to entice us.
Will do. Sure.
I don't think we're the type of people that Ollie's trying to entice. But anyway, let's carry on. By the way, for any of the listeners, in case you're not following Olu on Instagram, highly recommend you do it, because he has gone to visit some amazing spots in Bali. And he's also showing muscles that I haven't seen for a good couple of years. So he's in good shape as well. Sweating a lot, apparently. But anyway, Daniel, to your question, yeah, all good on our mind. Had a great trip in Switzerland where I was able to catch up with a good group of friends and show my wife the mountains for the first time. And then just recently got back from a week-long experience at Cambridge. I've got 2 more months left and then graduation time. So yeah, home stretch now.
Nice.
Mr. Johnson, how are you doing?
Yeah, short and sweet, all good on my end. Just working, unlike some, like Olu, just relaxing in the far east. But yeah, my time will come. Don't worry about that. But okay, great to hear that everyone's doing well. So let's dig into this episode. So, firstly, what were your thoughts about my intro to the episode? Did you think I wrote it? Did you hazard a guess that it was, formulated by ChatGPT?
Well, the way you positioned the question, you've definitely leveraged ChatGPT to create your intro. But what I can say, it had a lot of energy to it, so that's what I felt. It was good.
I don't know whether I've been using ChatGPT too much, but I think the second you started talking, Daniel, I just felt like this was a ChatGPT intro. But it could just be because I'm plugged into the system almost on a daily basis. But it was good. It was very good.
It was a really good intro. I think personally, I thought you probably used the tool because I know you're all in. you're all in on this AI. I'm
Chill,
just I'm
chill,
just
chill,
I'm
chill.
just surprised you didn't get a voiceover as well and play the voiceover first prior
No,
to.
you need to have text to speech software for that. I don't have anything like that. But no, I think sure you touched on a good point about being plugged in almost every day. But we'll get into your use cases later in the episode. But for those who have maybe been under a rock for the last couple of months or not really in the tech space, you may not have heard of ChatGPT. So let's kind of break it down to what ChatGPT is. So it's a language model developed by OpenAI, and it started back in 2018, and it's part of the GPT, so generative pre-trained transformer family of models, which are based on deep learning techniques that allow them to generate human-like responses to natural language input. So it's designed to understand the natural language and generate relevant and coherent responses. And it has been trained on a massive data set of text from the internet, which is allowed to learn patterns in language and generate responses that often are indistinguishable from those generated by humans. However, there's been a lot of drawback around it. So it started in 2018. OpenAI who founded ChatGPT. It launched in November 22 and it broke 1 million users in its first 5 days of launch. And often, if you're a user, you'll see that it crashes due to the traffic, those who are looking to get onto the service. In 2021, the tech firm had roughly a $14 billion valuation. And right now, it's valued at around 29 billion. So it's more than doubled in the last, say, 12 months at the time of its valuation, according to Semaphore. One thing to note about ChatGPT, it's really being used by the masses. We'll get into its use cases later in this episode. But one thing to note is Microsoft, back in, I believe, 2019, made $1 billion investment into ChatGPT and has pledged to make an extra $10 billion in this company. It actually started as a not-for-profit organization back in 2018, but given the capital it required to really expand, it had to change its strategy to be not-for-profit, and then had a lot of backers into ChatGPT. So that's kind of the background into OpenAI, the background into ChatGPT. So let's go into what can it be used for, what are the opportunities it brings, and then we can touch a little bit on what do we think the disadvantages are, the fears it may evoke or may come to light in future years or even now as people start to use it. And then do we think that other companies may come out with something, a similar product or a competing product to ChatGPT? So who wants to start off? Kind of maybe Sherelle will go to you, kind of because you've been using it. So what do you use it for?
So, two quick examples I can share. One is, and we've discussed it as a group on the podcast. So, I'm doing a part-time master's course in parallel to my career, and with that, of course, there are a lot of essays, a lot of things to read, a lot of content to consume, and also a lot of content to create. Now, what it has been useful for me is when I'm looking for literature, for example, on a particular topic. So specifically, I'm doing my thesis on a macroeconomic topic around wealth and wealth inequality in the UK. Is it getting bigger? And if so, what are the key contributing policies that can help reduce the gap? Now, to do a literature review of all the data that's out there on that topic would take me a few hours, maybe a couple of days, quite extensive work. But with ChatGPT or other additional tools, I can ask it to give me some sources of literature that is already published and out there, to then actually consolidate that information and give me a way to look at this information very quickly and, most importantly, find it very quickly. So that's one example, and it saved me a lot of time and effort. But of course, it's very important on what prompts you use. Content creation is another great use case as well. So, Daniel, I think you've mentioned about using it to record or prepare the intro to the episode. On my end, I've actually used it to help prepare some Instagram captions and also some tweets as well. So it's definitely useful, and it gives a good foundation to work on before modifying it based on your personal story. So those are two examples that I've had firsthand.
Olu, anything from your end?
Yeah, I think Shawas covers really the main use cases is anywhere that you're leveraging and using large data and you want it to, it's something called generative AI, or very like transforming. So what that means is able to create original content or original text, leveraging sort of the information or the training that the AI has actually learned. I think when it first came out, I was more looking at myself, the industry in which I work in, and said, okay, how can this particularly help? And I thought about finance, accounting, bookkeeping, right? That's a place where it's very rule based. So there's lots of documentation on how, like the gap auditing, how to particularly do your accounting or bookkeeping. So based on that, you can connect your sort of data um, into the AI tool, and then be able to then be ask it questions, and then it give you answers, right? I think that would be quite a cool element of it, where you say, okay, let me know what my cash flow estimate would be, and I think it'll be able to replicate that. So I think in the accounting, bookkeeping space, that's one way it's going to really help. The next one is really around sort of call centers, right? I think we've already started seeing a little with certain call centers where they've got like automated response. So they say, can you speak or say something, and then they can transfer you to the right place. But I think this is another place where it can add a lot of value in there as well. So yeah, I'm excited to see. I think there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of places it can help with. Um, but I think we're going to get later on to this episode about some of the disadvantages. But before we get there, I'll pass it on to
I
Pete.
know, before you pass on to P, I'm sure you, Ollie, you're gonna have a lot of a rap sheet for the disadvantages for it. But it's funny when you mentioned about the call centers, about the automated response, because when I get that automated person, I'm trying to do any response to get to a human being.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
might be irrelevant. I'm pressing 5, 6, 7, 8, the last option to
That's a
get to a
great point.
human, because
That's a great point.
I don't want to be talking to this thing and it says, sorry, I can't hear you. I don't know what you're saying. Did you mean this? No, I didn't. Oh, then it said
But do
the
you think
text go
that's,
online.
Daniel? Do you feel like that's because due to the quality of it, right? Because for
No,
me, it's the
because
frustration. Yeah.
it's not the quality. I think it's because I'm trying to have a conversation about something specific that only a
Mhm.
human can really understand, as opposed to a generic question like, "Oh, what are the opening times of a store?" or "Where
Yeah.
do I do a refund?" You know, those are quite generic questions where an automated response will suffice. But if you're trying to talk about something specific, like say, for example, an error in a bill or your phone bill or tax code issue, you want to talk to a human being.
But I think that's with especially the way the OpenAI and ChatGPT, the way they work is this thing called the language model, right? So it's more conversational versus the old ways that they used to do. So maybe it'll be better, but yeah, I agree with you. Currently, it's not. It doesn't work.
P.
Yeah, no, my
P. Have you used ChatGPT? You know, I think
so,
it's fair to say you're usually the last adopter of
Daniel,
technology in the group.
No,
Daniel,
so-
slow down, Daniel. Slow down. This guy just got his Apple Watch. Baby steps. Let's get him there.
no, it's funny. Couple things.
And he shows the
funny.
wrist.
No, it's funny. So funny enough, I'm yet to be an active user, but I was talking to Shuol this morning, and then I went to try and log in, and it said to me, due to sort of we're fully sort of, I mean, the space is completely filled up, so I can't sign up. So that's something that we can talk about a little bit in terms of how much traffic is actually running towards the site. But personally, I recognize that it's a multi-billion-dollar movement. It's a complete disruptor. As you've mentioned in the open. And I think the two biggest questions to ask about AI, with ChatGPT, is one is how great can the tool become in terms of how reliable and how good can the information can it output? And the second thing is how many jobs is it going to replace? In terms of couple benefits, I think some obvious ones. I think if you look at sort of the corporate space, just looking at, for example, a HR department, its ability to sort of draft up job descriptions and turn out at sort of at a high pace. If you look at sort of lawyers being able to write up summaries, I believe my prediction is if we had ChatGPT at university, I would have secured a first in my degree, right? Because
We're
its
gonna,
ability
we're gonna
to
talk about that in the disadvantages. We're gonna
its
talk about
ability
that.
to I know its ability to sort of generate code, right? So if you're a coder, it has its angle as well. So very, very powerful tool. And it can, it speaks to every different aspect in the industry today. So very, very clear advantages. But obviously it comes down to the quality of the output, which we'll come on to.
Yeah, agreed. And just to just to touch on quickly, content creation, as Shaw mentioned, it can be used for cover letters, job descriptions, writing recipes, writing poems, asking it general questions like you would Google. Many people think that Chat GPT will replace Google in the future, but I think it needs a lot of work. And also can write university essays or assignments. Can even write raps if you're looking for a ghostwriter. But then
just quickly, then it's funny you said that, because there are reports that suggest that it's going to become the #1 search engine. But having spoken to Shuo earlier today, based on how often he's using it, you know, that's not maybe so far from the truth. It could be.
it could
Ollie
be, it could
seems-
be, and I think it only seems to be a decisive no. Olu, why you
Yeah,
think no?
let's get Olu
Nope.
in the ring. Let's hear his comments.
Nope.
Come on,
Let's
Olu.
yes.
don't wanna
So let's
jump.
now
but
let's
not-
talk to this. Let's move on to the disadvantages then. Olu,
Yeah.
you got the mic. Go.
Oh, we go on disadvantages, or we talking
Yeah, yeah.
about competitive?
We'll talk about the disadvantages now of
Okay, and then we'll go-
ChatGPT.
Okay, cool. So it's funny because I started off with disadvantages and then I ended up having a long list and I didn't really get to the advantages. But you guys can feel free to talk about the advantages. But sort of the disadvantages, I think P mentioned, right? If this was around during university, he would have got a first class degree, which takes you back to it's going to make human beings lazy, right? If we get to a place where people can use this to do coding, people can use it to write the essays, where is going to be that expertise or knowledge? And as a human race, we're going to become dumber and dumber in regards to just a reliance on this as just an assistant to do everything, right? People will be like, oh, I've got English essay, GPT, write this, da, 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 da. Are they going to be able to do it themselves? Now, you can argue, yes, it's going to make life more productive, etc. But there's still an element of learning and understanding how to code. And
How does this transformation differ from the transformation of like
The internet.
Wikipedia and the
The
internet?
internet.
Because
the
yeah.
difference is
everything you're saying
it
is
was giving you information. Like you use the internet right now. We say internet right now is probably one of the best tools for educating and learning from. So you watch a YouTube video, right? And you are actually trying to learn. That's different from me saying, hey, write an essay for me. It's not, it's also different from Shawel's using it as in, okay, collect and put together a source of data so then I can then learn and read it versus me submitting my dissertation or thesis, just getting it to write it for me, or like yeah, etc. So that's the difference in there. Now, when I've heard a lot of people talking about the use case, a lot of them have mentioned what you just said, P, right? You didn't say, oh, I'll use it to assist me to learn or help me. You said I would have got first class because it would have done all your assignments for you. So that's one of the elements. The second element, which we've got to always be careful of, is even though it's generative AI and you can come up with original text, it needs the use of the open internet. So it's not really original. You say, hey, write this in the style of Eminem or in the style of something. It's not like it's creating new art. It's basically leveraging what is out there and already exists, right? So that originality element is there. The element of it also is for it to work is being trained, right?
Mhm.
And when things are trained, you've got to ask yourself, where is the source of data coming from? So there's been so many examples of early stage AI. I think Microsoft had a company called Tai, which they had to close down because of the racist slur, the sexist views. Like this world, like it's gonna look. Let's say, for example, it was to search the internet, the open AI, right? And it looks at the what they class as the history of sort of the world. And it says, you know what, minorities are less than white people, right? And then it's given answers or whatever in that sort of racist, bias way. Like you got to be completely careful with that element of it. And I think as it gets bigger and bigger and it starts to self-learn itself, that could be a completely dangerous thing, right? So how do you combat that? Another disadvantage, you're going to have to get human beings still to clean and regulate the data. So it's going to have to teach itself like, okay, this is inappropriate, this is incorrect, whatever, etc. So yeah, I think I've went through quite a few of the disadvantages, right? But those are like the main ones that stood out for me. Advantages element of it is if it's used the right way, it could be a great assistant for you. It can drive productivity. It can drive you working on the important things or learning the important things versus spending hours. I think Shiwa gave a great example. Spending hours looking at multiple sources. It's basically like Google, like we have right now. I think if it uses that sort of concept, but it makes it more easier, more of a conversational element, then that would be good. But I'll pass on to you guys.
Yeah, I just want to quickly jump in actually, just maybe correct my statement around it would have got me a first. I think I was leaning towards, because I think Olu, you bring up a good point around how you use it, right? So
Mm.
it becomes a real negative if you just copy and paste. But if you give it, and I think Sean mentioned this, it's using as a foundational element
Mm.
to generate some data, and then add your personal touch or understanding on top, right? To save time, which I think is the biggest factor that we can talk about. So yeah, the extreme is you copy and paste, and then you don't have authenticity, or you don't actually have any type of understanding of what you're actually doing. But if you can find the hybrid, I think it can actually help with a lot of students. So let's see how
Agreed.
that goes. So yeah, I would have, it would have increased my probability of getting the first. I'll put it that way. Sure.
I think, I mean, Ollie, you've touched upon some of the key points, and P, you nicely added. I think from my end, again, from first-hand experience, I would say at the moment, because we are in such an early phase of Chat GPT, there's a big question around accuracy. So the examples that I gave earlier on how I've used it, because it's essentially scraping multiple websites and sources across the internet, it pulls one number, but actually is referring to a different statistic and vice versa. So at the moment, it's still in its infancy. So again, just to get a feel of a topic, to get a direction of a topic, it's great. But if you peel down one more layer, then it's still not 100% there. But again, we're almost where Google was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So there's a long way to go. And I think it will have more advantages than disadvantages at the moment. So Olu, we can definitely discuss this later on. I would just do a plug, actually. We have a Take Flight podcast episode all the way back in episode number 73, where we had the privilege of interviewing Simon Brown, who's the Chief Learning Officer of Novartis, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And there, one of the things that he recommended for people to do with this learning mindset is to not worry too much about having the answers, but to ask very, very good questions. And I think this is becoming even more important now as we go into this Chat GPT or GPT era. And in case you didn't want to go all the way back to episode 73, episode 137, you can also check out, where I did a takeaway episode where the title is Leadership Lessons Asking Better Questions. So there's two plugs there. I think with that, I'll pass it over to you, Daniel.
Dan, before you go, actually, because you probably have quite a few points, and this is drawbacks. I just wanted to tie in with what Sean Olu mentioned, which is the I guess the theme of one of the major disadvantages is garbage in, garbage out. So that point around training, right? So, but that also speaks to myself and Daniel on a call, and he was telling me, look, try it out, right? So, and we was trying to. He asked me a question like, type in this particular job description or see what comes out. If the question is not great, the answer won't be good, right? So it's even yourself knowing how to use the tool in an effective way. But I think the biggest disadvantage that I've noticed or recognized, especially in a world today where we have cybersecurity issues in companies, is people are actually using ChatGPT to train it and sort of create code for hacking, right, and for software dysfunction. So that's something which has been detected, has been picked up. And think about the other extreme where you can type something in and say, how do I hack this particular iPhone? And it can give you a series of answers, right? So now you're even allowing the hackers to get to their sort of answers a lot faster, which is quite scary. So I think that's the biggest disadvantage, which needs to be in some way, shape, or form controlled by those who train it. To Ollie's point, Daniel.
Yeah, just to highlight to the listeners, whilst it's an open source tool, it does have some safeguards. So there are parameters or responses that it will not provide. So you can't just look for, ask malicious questions for malicious intent or to do something that's illegal. It would, block that response or block that question. I haven't tried it. I don't want it marked against my ID, but I know it says that when you're logging in or the kind of the terms and conditions around that. So based, on what's already said, the accuracy and factuality is one of the main concerns of ChatGPT. It's in its infancy. I think over time it will continue to grow, it will continue to develop, it will continue to be trained. But yes, it is open source. It may be tailored responses based on its sort of input, and therefore, thinking outside the box. Are we going to be trained by a tool to think one way? Are we going to be trained to think, okay, these are the answers, this is fact, this is gospel, rather than to be able to think freely for yourself? But on the disadvantages and the fears, I think many people are afraid that it's going to replace their job. ChatGPT is very good for to be a conversational agent, for content generation, for research, and for creative applications. So I think at this stage, many people are fearful that it will, take their jobs. People are thinking, okay, if I'm out of a job, what else can I do? And I think it's time to really start thinking about your value, just in general. And this goes for everyone, irrespective of the industry, because as this grows, its ability to do more things will also grow. And for those who are actually interested in a podcast, there was a mini series by Reid Hoffman, who was co-founder of LinkedIn. He had he has a mini series podcast with about AI, and has an episode directly with ChatGPT in a conversational manner where he uses text to speech for ChatGPT's response. So check that out if you're interested. It's on YouTube and Spotify. But moving on now, I think we touched on its use cases, what it can be used for, which is somewhat its advantages, the disadvantages of the tool. But then let's look at kind of, do we think other companies will release something similar? Is for anyone who pays attention to the news, Google have something similar. I'll let Olu touch on that because I think he's got a bit to share on that, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I'm just I don't think it's going. Okay, let's take a step back. So I think, Daniel, you mentioned in the intro that Microsoft is one of the main investors in ChatGPT, correct?
Yeah.
Please, what is their search engine called?
Or Bing.
How many people on this?
That was a big flop. That was a big flop. That was one of the biggest flops. Yeah, no one uses Bing.
So I think most people, the large population of people, are going to use ChatGPT as a replacement for search, right? And if that's the case, what's the number one company that has years and years of understanding Alphabet, right? Google, right? So they've got years of experience, understanding, the best in the game when it comes to coding, understanding this. So I don't believe it's going to be just a one person monopolize and take over the whole industry. But I think it would be naive to think that Google, and which they have released their own version of it, is not going to compete and put up an amazing fight just because of how large the business is in terms of how much it's worth. It's worth more than Microsoft last time I checked. So I think there's going to be multiple plays in the space. I think what's going to be quite interesting more for me is the smaller players. So who are able to leverage or use it to make it functional for organizations, right? I would love a day where a company comes into the industry that I work in and say, hey, look, we're going to revolutionize the way you guys do finance. Instead of you having all these datas all over the place or whatever, we can empower you in a way where you can just talk to this tool and it can give you all the different answers, right? So that's more interesting for me. But going back to the original question, right? I think in my mind, Google is too big, too much experience in the space, and yeah.
But it's funny you said that, Olu, because whilst I agree something more niche would be more revolutionary, because if something like ChatGPT, that would end up being acquired by Google or Microsoft, anyone, a big player.
Correct.
And, they'll get a big payout,
Correct.
they'll enjoy it. But Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, part of the Alphabet company, they recently unveiled their competitor called Bard in a brief presentation earlier in February. And the brevity of the presentation and the fact that Bard gave at least one incorrect answer in a live sort of demo was the main criticism of the event. So rather than people seeing it as a direct competitor, they saw it was something that was a huge error, and it was factually incorrect, and many people within Google have come to say, it was just it was terrible that they rushed. They even said that they rushed with the layoffs, they rushed with this product, and it's an absolute flop. So on your point about Google coming into the space, they really need to take their time to do it. And I think optically it just doesn't look the way that they want to invest 10 billion with mass layoffs at the same time. It just doesn't look right from an outside perspective.
I think, Daniel, what you're talking about is probably one of the reasons why Microsoft did it really well, right? They're investing, but they're still part of open AI. They haven't integrated it to their suite of work, right? Because of what you've just mentioned there.
Not yet. Not yet.
They haven't integrated it yet because of what you've mentioned there in terms of the credibility element of it. Is if it gives a wrong answer or it leads to something, something completely crazy, right? The reputation that these companies will lose and the sues and whatever, they don't want to be in that yet. So I don't think it's going to completely integrate into Microsoft or Google yet. It's probably going to be another sort of 1-2 years time before we start to see it more integrate into like people's emails, etc., etc. But yeah. So,
Daniel, I was going to say I haven't seen the presentation where this mistake was made, but I draw a comparison to when Elon Musk. I know it's a very different orbit. When Elon Musk revealed one of the Tesla trucks, and I'm saying that to say that potentially Google's strategy could have been a publicity stunt. When you make a mistake,
This one wasn't.
oh, was it? When you make a only time will tell. But when you make a mistake on stage in your presentation, in some ways that can actually trend faster than something actually working. So when Elon Musk, I think he threw something at the truck and then he said it won't break, and it did break. That actually got it to go viral versus the actual unveiling of the truck. So let's see how things plan out. But it's interesting now you're telling us now about this presentation where something went wrong. Because if it didn't, would you bring it up? So let's see how it goes. But I think Google's too big to fail, right? So they can afford to maybe make a stunt like this. So let's see. But it's I totally agree with your point and around the fact that I think they just will acquire anyone else that tries to run something like a ChatGPT. They'll just pick you up.
Sure. Anything from your side?
Yeah, I think from my end, it's just interesting. I know on our podcast, this is all about talking about business strategies, tactics, what these big companies are doing. I think for all the listeners to observe what Microsoft and Google will now go into. Google had a search business that was printing infinite amounts of cash, and now suddenly they've got a chink in their armor where their very, very profitable, huge business could be potentially impacted by this new tool and new wave of search. And Microsoft, which, as Olu already said, with Bing isn't very well known. But Olu, actually, to say that, with all Microsoft Office laptops, anytime you search in Windows or any of the tools, that actually translates into a Bing search. So it's all already embedded.
No, I go to Google instead. I'll type in Bing. Google.
You know when you go on your on a Microsoft laptop, if you press start and you search for something on the computer, that is actually a Bing search. That one.
I open my Chrome and go.
Do you know Bing? Did you know Bing actually runs on Google technology?
Does it?
I didn't know.
No, I made that up. I made that up.
Yeah, so the wrong answer from ChatGPT.
Well, you mentioned something that's quite interesting that I would like to get your feedback on it, right? Because everyone knows the way Google works, right, is they make a lot of money through ads, right? So the first few responses are going to be whoever's paid the most for the placement, right? Then after that, you then get like based on the algorithm, etc. How would that work with this, right? Because it's given you want to feel like, because this could be a big disadvantage to it, because you want to feel like someone's not paying to be placed or to give me this particular response. You want to feel like I'm asking this and it's giving me a fair opinion of stuff, right? So I'm not really sure how they're going to monetize it as much as they're going to monetize, as much as Google's been able to monetize it. Based on that element of it, it only gives you one answer. It's not like it says there's these people paid it. Like, have you thought about that element?
Olu, it's a great question, and to be honest, I haven't thought about it because I think
Hmm.
going back to a comment we said earlier, we're so early in this game.
That's
But I
true.
think for the listeners, the point that I was making was we're seeing two huge companies who are the best at what they do, with some of the best talent in the world, and they're really going to battle with each other in this space. So I think from a business perspective, learning perspective, we will learn a lot over the next couple of years and see how it develops. And I'm excited to see how it continues, and of course how we debrief it on Take Flight podcast.
Just quickly,
Yeah.
two things I wanted just to mention. From a valuation standpoint, it's interesting, Daniel, you mentioned earlier that they are valued at 29 billion. So it'll be interesting to understand how companies like this are valued. I know I think you said it took 2 months to reach 100 million users with ChatGPT, and it was 9 months to reach 100 million with TikTok, right? So the valuation space is going to be interesting for this. But the other thing that came to mind as we were talking, Ollie, you alluded to this earlier in the sense of the human race dumbing down, is a bigger question is the evolution of human intelligence. So I just use a very basic example, right? Generation before us didn't need a calculator to calculate math equations, right? They could do it top of their heads, and they can still do it today. We use calculators, we use our iPhone. It's getting to a space now where you almost have to ask yourself, what does the new human intelligence look like? Because if you rely heavily on something like ChatGPT, you will never have to think again. So
That's
it's
a problem.
and
That's a
but the
problem.
question is, no, Olu, is it a problem? Because
Yes.
but it depends in which world you're living in, right? So this is what I'm saying. I think, was it a problem when Google search came out? Today you would say no.
Yeah,
Right,
Olu,
so I think
if I had $1 for every time you said in an episode, just Google it, mate. Well, I think we'd all be billionaires. I've heard you say
that's
that a
my
lot.
point. So I think
Totally, again, and it all comes down to, so the thing, like I think you guys have mentioned, right, is I'm looking this as more of the mass society, right? Not in terms of people that are going to leverage it to advance them, learn, etc., etc. And I feel like even if we start looking forward and forward, right, as a whole society, the mass of our
sure,
society, right,
sure.
I think there's been a decline, and there is currently a decline in terms of education. Now, it doesn't mean that the innovation, like the top 1%, are not getting smarter, or whatever, etc. I'm just saying the full population is going to be full of so many people just say, Chat GPT, I've got an English essay, do this for me, blah, blah, blah.
Then I think a safe conclusion to make is just like how capital the wealth gap widens, so will the intelligence gap, and
Agreed.
it will accelerate with something like ChatGPT. So which side are you going to be on, and what does it look like to be on that upper echelon?
It's
That was
even
a
going to
great way to
be,
put that.
and I think it's even when you think about it, it's like, how did we work cross-functionally globally before the era of the internet without messaging or computing? And that's like, we can think about that now. Then in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, our children could say, how did you work without AI? What did you do? And I think over time, it's just things evolve and things evolved. And like, how do we do things before? How do we do things before? And I think it's just the evolution of history, history, and then the evolution of and the future coming into play.
And I
But yeah,
think that's what
it's
all of you
interesting
guys
to.
are saying. And she was saying is that it's too early to understand what the use case is. And I just pray that, like you've mentioned, Daniel, is used to really support, but still make people curious, learn, etc. Versus like P perfectly worded, right? Is it going to increase the intelligence gap? Which, yeah, that's worrying.
Yeah.
I don't want everyone
That's,
to say they got first class at university. You got to work for that. You got to
No,
work
but
for
that's the old school. That's the old school voice, right? The seniors. In my day,
but, wait,
in
actually,
1994,
wait,
I
wait.
had to work for my degree, right?
On that
Whereas
that
in
point,
today's world, they're getting 4 degrees in the same time frame, if that's even something that you need.
on that point, something that is relevant today is the archaic thinking of 5 days in the office all year round, as opposed to a hybrid model of working.
Hmm.
It's almost the case of apple and oranges, but it's translatable. But anyway,
I would
like,
just
like
I know there's a lot of questions we're asking. I would just challenge the point Shua mentioned about it's early, because
Agreed.
I don't know if it is early. I know what you're saying, and I agree with you in that sense. But the moment you think it's early is when it's just sort of raced ahead, and then you're part of the other end of the spectrum, which is now using ChatGPT for everything, and your intelligence is going down. So I think this episode has really made me ask some hard questions, honestly. About
Is P trying to say that advising people to be early adopters when it comes to technology when he just basically got
no.
when he got an iPhone?
But the thing is, I see P as someone who hasn't signed up to this platform yet.
listen,
And as soon as he signs up, oh, this thing's a bad boy. Oh my gosh.
that was like
remember
Clubhouse.
Do you remember the podcast episode about Clubhouse, mate? This guy was on fire that episode. But actually, just to also add some color to the comments. So in terms of being early, it was more like at the moment we can chuck in text into ChatGPT and it comes out in text. But soon text could be translated into pictures. Pictures, actually, they're already AI tools. Text could then be related to pictures. Pictures could then generate videos. Videos could then be movies. Movies could be feature films, press conferences, even the podcast episode like this. We could be like, there's 4 people, Olu, Daniel, Shua, Pabilo. They've done this number of episodes in this type of format. Please create a new episode about this topic. It could really go from there. So I think it will unlock a lot of opportunities that maybe aren't on our radar now, but it'll probably come quickly. Hopefully it's not a Clubhouse or metaverse moment.
and they're starting to monetize it because they have the free open source version, then they have the pro version which they've released, which is I think $29 or $20 per month.
I think P's already registered his card. P's already registered his card details.
What I wanted to say, just really quickly, I think one of the smartest things you probably could do is look to work for these companies, become an insider. We talked about jobs earlier. You probably want to work for them, understand where this is all going. Not a bad idea.
It might scare you. But I think on that note, I think we'll wrap up the episode. So let me just open up OpenAI to find out how to close an episode. Thank you all for listening to this episode 171 of Take Flight Podcast about ChatGPT. We hope you found it informative. If you haven't, that's on you. So this is all ChatGPT's response. I'm joking. This is all me. No, but as always, thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you found it insightful and useful to know a little bit more about ChatGPT, its opportunities, the disadvantages, and what the future holds. Well, let's see how this all plays out because AI is certainly an exciting space. If you have any feedback, find us on Instagram at Take Flight Podcast. Until next week, stay safe and God bless.
Take off, take